My plans about traveling to Thailand.
Okay, here we go. So we're now at the Motzei Lag BaOmer, right? The Lag BaOmer just passed out, and we're here, Lad BaOmer, on the Lamed Daled, and we're going to go on with Pirkeh Avot. Maybe also we'll mention something about Rabbi Shimon as well, so for the Kavod of Lag BaOmer holiday. So let's see what it says in Pirkeh Avot. Right, we'll continue. We talked about some Pirkei Avot also a couple of days ago. We're going to continue from there. So it says over here something interesting, that ולא כל המרבה בסחורה מחכים. So you know what that means? That there are people, who like to do business. We have a lot of people like that in the Jewish community, Georgian community, Bukharian community. Lots of people like that. The Persian community, everywhere. It's everywhere. So, so what is he trying to tell you over here? That if you do a lot of business, you do a lot of trading, and you get into that like really heavily. So don't expect to become like a big rabbi. You know what I mean? So what does that mean? It probably won't happen. Because you won't have the time. You know what I mean? So don't expect to become a big Torah scholar. Don't try to like live in two worlds. We said, right, 1 foot over here, 1 foot. You remember that, right? We said that you can't live in both worlds. You know what I mean? You can't succeed in both areas. That's what he's trying to tell you over here. Sometimes it does happen, by the way. Rarely, you see somebody like that who was able to do, both and be quite successful in both areas. But it's very rare, So that's what he's trying to tell you over here. That it doesn't work with everybody. It's, Huh? Well, I wasn't thinking about him, but
One better example.
Well, maybe so.
He succeeded, right?
Okay, you got me there. You got me there. Okay, so that's the way it is, right? So that's what I'm trying to tell you, that don't think, you're going to make it in both worlds, be a big tycoon, big shot businessman, and also succeed in Torah. Why is that? Because Torah requires a lot of attention, a lot of discipline, a lot of study, So you're not going to make it probably, if you're going to invest too much time in business. This is what we're trying to say over here. And that has to do with, by the way, with Rabbi Shimon, So what's the thing, right? That it says in the Gemara, Rabbi Shimon went and hid in the cave with Rabbi Elazar, his son, They stayed there for 12 years, then they went back again, for another round after that. So what happened was that they were there for quite a long time, like many years. So what happened was, the Gemara says something amazing about that. The Rabbi Shimon, before he went to the cave, to hide, we talked about that, by the way, why he went there to the cave. He was chased by the Romans, the Romans wanted to arrest him. There was a warrant out for his arrest. So he had to flee. You know what I mean? So what happened was that he ran off, he went to the cave, and nobody knew that he was there. Like this was like a secret location. You know what I mean? Even his wife didn't know that he was there. You know what I mean? So what happened was that they stayed there for a long time. They say that before he went into the cave, what did he do over there for all that time? He studied Torah. They had nothing else to do. What are they going to do? There's no cable TV there, no computers, right? No tablets, no nothing there. What are you going to do over there? All you got is Torah. So they went in there, him and his son. They studied Torah for many, many years, And what happened was that after they came out, they say that he was much greater than when he came in, obviously. But the thing was like this, that when he went in there, he wasn't considered to be one of the top rabbis of the generation. He was he was big, but not like in the top 3, let's say, right? Whatever, he wasn't in that category at that time. But they say when he came out, he already went up so fast, he shot up so fast, that nobody was like him anymore. Nobody was able to touch him anymore in Torah. So why is that? Because he invested all his life into Torah at that point in time, and so therefore he grew up very, very, very exponentially. He grew. So you see from there. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah.
When you say he went into the cave and he never came out,
They came out in the end, but
No, I mean, he lived a life though, right?
There was no life. There was nothing. They were just there all the time. It was a miracle. The whole thing was a miracle. We talked about this before.
They didn't eat. They didn't come out for food.
They had a tree there. There was they had fruits, going. It was a whole miraculous situation. You know what I mean?
And I'm sorry, how long was
you think, by the way, they say today, they say, oh, how do they survive over there, in that steel factory in Mariupol, they were there for 2 months or whatever. They were there for more than 20 years, and they lived like that. So Mariupol is nothing compared to them, you know what I mean? Doesn't come close. You understand? What they did was they buried their bodies into the ground. Only their heads were sticking out because they had no showers, no baths, no nothing. There was nothing. So there was no way they could even bathe, or there was no clothing, nothing. Just they were living like the most basic life you could ever live. Like you can imagine. It's beyond basic. It's miraculous. What I mean? It was a miracle there, of course, obviously. So what happened was that when he came out, they say, he became like the biggest lion in Torah. Nobody was able to touch him. You know what I mean? What's the reason for that? Because he devoted his life strictly to Torah. So that's exactly what I was trying to tell you over here. The Pirkeh Avot. If you're going to get into business too much, you're probably not going to become, a big rabbi. Fat chance, dream on. You know what I mean? That's so don't have these illusions in your head. It's not going to happen, probably. Okay, that's one thing, right? Then we go on to say like this, right? Another important thing that Pirkeh Avot tells you, "V'makom she'en anashim yishtadel liot ish." This is a very important concept in Torah. You know what this means? That when you're in a place where there's no, literally it means men, right? There's no men there. There's only women.
Like in America.
There's only women there, right? With lipstick, and makeup. And I'm joking, right? But what I'm saying is like this, right? There's no men. What does that mean, no men? What does that have to do with gender? What's this? What it means to say there's no strong, powerful men. What does it mean, strong, powerful? Not physically like a gorilla. We're not talking about that, right? We're talking about in Torah. There's no men that are big in Torah. There's no chacham over there. There's no Talmid chacham. You know what I mean? So in a place like that, says the Pirkei Avot, try to be a man. You try to be him, even though you're not really such a big man. What does that mean? You are a man, obviously, but when it comes to Torah, you're not such a big man. But since you know something, and you know more than everybody else who's sitting there, so you take the leadership position. Like you usurp the leadership. What does that mean? Give some divrei Torah, give a lecture. Give a shiur, give a darash. Yidarash it. That's what it means, right? So who else is there? Nobody. If you don't do it, nobody else is going to do it because you're the best guy that they have there. You know what I mean? So at the same time, sometimes it happens like this. You're in a place, you're in a shul, let's say, right? Or you went to a certain function, somewhere, some event, and there's no rabbi there. They didn't invite the rabbis. I guess they were too cheap. They didn't want the rabbis to come. So there's no rabbis. So you're like close to being a rabbi. Like you're like half a rabbi. Like palu chachamiya. Chatzi chacham. So okay, so you take the leadership, and say some divrei Torah, say something, do something, make believe like you know something, and say some words of Torah. You know what I mean? So what do you see from there? It's all relative. You know what I mean? It's like depending on who you're with, you may become the leader at that point in time. You know what I mean? So if you're the leader, go for it, and take the leadership. That's what I'm trying to tell you, right? By the way, this also has a very strong caveat here, which is, in another place in Pirkei Avot tells you just the opposite of this. There's always contradictions, in the Torah. You have to know how to reconcile them. So there's another place, it says in Pirkei Avot that, if you're in a place where there's some rabbis there, and you jump up and try speaking some divrei Torah, like basically you're a sinner. You shouldn't do that, Why? Why is that? Because you're disrespecting the rabbis that are there, Like, what do you know compared to them? You're not like even half on their level. You know what I mean? So why are you trying to take the leadership in a place where, there's some real rabbis there? So you got to know your place, So what's the reconciliation here? How do you reconcile? Reconciliation is like this, very simple, If there's nobody there bigger than you, you take the leadership. But if there is, shut your mouth, and let that rabbi talk. What business do you have to bother him? By the way, this is not, some people think, by the way, this is like some kind of a personal thing, Oh, you insulted me, like I'm a rabbi, It's not a personal issue here. It's not a personal insult. What it is, it's you're insulting the Torah. You know what I mean? What does that mean? The Torah that person has, who's bigger than you, you're like ignoring it, like he doesn't exist, So that you're trying to make believe. It's not right to do that, So a person has to know, like when somebody there bigger than you, don't speak the words of Torah over there. Shut your mouth and let him speak, and
So in other words, if there's a function like that,
Yeah.
and you're not there, I can take over. But once you walk in,
Exactly. That's what we're trying to say. But that's the point, right? So a person has to know, right, where he's sitting, where he is. So the truth is, the Chazal warn us, by the way, about this. This can be very dangerous also as well. What does that mean? That a person, tries to, let's say his rabbi is there, and so what he does is, he speaks Divrei Torah in front of him, like he's the leader, insults his rabbi, sort of, As we said, right, it's not personal, this thing. You're just insulting his Torah. So we have a couple of stories in the Torah about this, which show how severe it is. I'll tell you a story, by the way, that I heard from Rabbi Shlomo Amar, who was the chief rabbi in Israel for 8 years. And now he's the chief rabbi in Jerusalem only. There's all kinds of jobs, whatever. So he was also Dayan, he was a judge, he was a Talmid of the rabbi, Maran our rabbi. He was a Talmid he was a disciple of the rabbi. So what happened was, right, that one day he told us a story. I was there. He told us this story. He said, I happened to be in Tel Aviv, there's a great synagogue there, a big synagogue in Tel Aviv. So he says, I was there and I was giving a lecture, he was a big rabbi there, whatever. So giving a lecture. So he says, all of a sudden, unexpectedly, who comes in? Maran, Rabbi comes in there, shows up all of a sudden. He didn't know he was coming. So you know what he said, right? He says, right away, I got scared, I felt intimidated by that. What does that mean? That I was giving words of halakha, for the lecture, and now the rabbi is sitting there, and he's listening to my words of halakha. He says that's not really proper, So he says, why should you have to listen to me? I'm his student, So he says, what did I do? He says, I started talking about something else, and changed the subject. Why? Because at least I didn't want to speak words of halakha in front of him. In other words, you can talk about something else, maybe it's even better. So what does that mean? The truth is, there's a rule like this, by the way, you should know. There's a rule in halakha, which says that if you want to speak, and there's a rabbi there, who's bigger than you, so what you have to do is take his permission. Like ask him, would you mind if I, say some words? If he allows you, you're allowed to do it. Right? That's the rule. This way, right, he doesn't mind, so you're fine. There's a rule like this, in the Talmud. It says, right, the rabbi who forgives his honor is forgiven, He forgave his honor, so, you're allowed to, whatever. But anyway, Rav Amar, he pointed out a good thing, he said something smart. He said, that applies to what? When you're talking about, some Divrei Torah, not halakha. But when you're talking halakha, which is more like, authoritative, like words. Like, you must do this, you must do that. This is allowed, this is not allowed. So he says, that I didn't want to say in front of the rabbi, even though I had permission, obviously. What's the reason why? So there's a story brought down, in the from the Bible comes, from the Chumash. What does it say over there? That after they went to fight the war with Midian, in the Chumash it says, right, in the book of Bamidbar, book of Numbers, what happened was that after that war, Elazar, a Kohen, who was the son of Aharon, a Kohen, right? He was the son of Aharon. So at that time, Aaron was already passed away. He passed away already, before that. So what happened was that Elazar was now the chief high priest. At that point, his son took over. So what happened was that he gave some halachot to the people about what to do with the utensils. After the war is over, goyish utensil. Does it need a mikveh? Does it need to be hagala? To be boiling water, all kinds of things like this. Libun. So he gave all kinds of halachot. So they say in the Talmud that this was not a good thing what he did. Even though he had permission from Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu knew that he was going to do it. He had permission. In fact, he probably asked him to do it. I don't remember exactly the whole thing. Probably he asked him to do it. So he gave some halachot over there. So what happened was that they say that afterwards, when Moshe Rabbeinu passed away, what happened was that Elazar was supposed to become the chief authority in halakha at that point. Elazar was supposed to take over. But they say, that Elazar all of a sudden, if you look in the book of Yeshua, of Joshua, whatever, You see over there that Elazar doesn't. It's not present there, and not giving the halachot. He's not giving the halachot. So the question is, why not? So the Chazal say, you know what happened, right? He died. He died prematurely. Why is that? Because he spoke halachot in front of his Rabbi, in front of Moshe Rabbeinu. This caused him to die prematurely. So you see from there, right, that not a good. That's why Rav Amar, he said something very smart. He said, when the rabbi walked in, I stopped saying halachot. I didn't want to say halachot in front of him. Finished. You know what I mean? That's the whole thing. So that's exactly what we're talking about here. That there's two extremes over here, right? If there is somebody bigger than you, you know what? Just shut your mouth and let him talk. If there isn't, then take over and take charge. That's the whole. Yeah. Okay, very good. So we're going to go to the next Mishnah, which is Vav. By the way, this Mishnah, what he says over here, we talked about this, you and me, in the past. I'm not sure if you recall, but we had some discussions about this. Right? So what happened was that by the way, this Mishnayot that we're talking here were said by Hillel. Right? So says Hillel like this. He saw a skull that was floating in the water. Right? Skull. You're probably going to find those in Ukraine today, right? Many skulls floating in the water. Right? So it's not funny, but what can you do? That's the way it is, right? So he finds a skull. So he says something, he utters something when he sees this. So he says, Amar la al de'atef atfuch v'sof b'tifayich yetufun. Look what he says, something unbelievable, right? So he says, why are you in the water, your skull floating in the water? What's the reason why? In other words, why did you die like this, a disgraceful death, like you weren't even buried. Your skull is floating in the water. It's a disgrace, like a person wants to be buried, have some honor, have some, he doesn't want to be, wants to have a decent burial, which is a decent thing to do, right? But this guy didn't even get that. So Hillel, right away opens his mouth. What does he say? He says, why did this happen to you like this? You know why? Because you did the same thing. What does that mean? Because you murdered somebody, somebody came and murdered you. That's why your skull is floating in the water. You got it? You got the point? Right? So we see from there, by the way, this is, by the way, like ABC, of Torah. Because it says in Parshat Noach, right? After Bereshit, after Genesis, the second Parsha, about Noach, it says over there, right, that a person who kills his fellow man will be also killed himself. This is the right. So there's different ways to understand that. By the way, what does it mean he'll be killed himself? One way to understand is that he'll be killed by somebody else. Somebody else will come and kill him to punish him for what he did. Measure for measure. That's one explanation. Another explanation is that the Bet Din, the court, is commanded to kill him because he murdered somebody. He's liable to death. Capital punishment. So this is what he's right. So he says, not only that, so it goes further. It says, whoever killed you and made your skull float in the river, in the water, he says, he'll also be killed one day. In other words, his skull will also be floating in the water. Don't worry. You'll be all right. In other words, your death will be avenged. So don't worry about that either. This is what Hillel tells him. So we're just basically learning a basic, concept in Torah, which is very, very important to understand. That, there's consequences for your deeds. You can't just tuck things under the rug. And to think, oh yeah, well, yeah, I killed somebody, but yeah, I'll be all right. You'll be. What do you mean you'll be all right? How are you going to be all right? You murdered somebody. You're going to get what you deserve. What do you think is going to happen to you? That's the idea. Okay, let's go on. Now going to Zion. This is a beautiful Mishnah, by the way. This one teaches you a lot of important things and interesting, and also somewhat funny as well. I don't know, whatever. It's quite humorous, Also, so what does it say over here in Zion, Mishnah Zion? It says, "Hu Omer Hillel." Right again, we're going with Hillel. Hillel the elder, right? Hillel Zaken. So it says, "Hu Omer Marbe Basar Marbe Rima." Right? That's an incredible thing, This is, you have to tell people who like to go to restaurants, this one. The restaurant goers. right? So, what does it say over here? If you eat a lot of flesh, or you have a lot of flesh, there's a different way to understand it, right? Marbet imam, the only thing that's going to help you, your flesh, that you eat. In other words, you eat a lot of meat, or in other words, you get fat, and you have a lot of meat in your body. The only thing that's going to help you is that when you get buried, the worms are going to eat you more. In other words, there's going to be more worms eating you. So what do you see from there, right? So it doesn't really pay to be fat, in other words, being fat is not really something which is going to help you much in life. The more you eat, the more they'll eat you, when you get into the grave. You know what I mean? So what does that mean? There's no purpose in that, like eating so much, like that, just being slobbering,
But some people digest better than others. I mean,
it's true, yeah, of course, yeah, of course, It's all relative.
Remember when we were kids?
Yeah.
Remember your metabolism?
Right, sure. Those are the good old days.
I couldn't get it.
Absolutely, you're right. So, so that's what we're saying, right? So, what does that mean? That in other words, there's no prohibition to be fat either. In the Torah, halakhically speaking, like nobody's gonna tell you, oh, why are you fat? Like you're a sinner. You're not a sinner if you're fat. But it's not gonna help you much in life. That's what we're trying to say. What I mean? All you're gonna be is have a lot of worms, in your grave. That's all there. Also, that's all you get. Okay, very good. That's a good one. So.
Yeah, that's a bizarre one. I mean.
This is even perhaps stronger, right? Marbe nechasim, marbe deaga. This you have to tell to Americans, because Americans like to do a lot of business, and make billions of dollars, get rich, become tycoons,
Well,
become entrepreneur, entrepreneur,
Yeah.
What do you do for a living? I'm an entrepreneur. What does that mean? Okay, so I'll tell you what it means, right? You want to have a lot of possessions, you want to have a lot of real estate, right? You want to have a lot of cars, at least 5 cars, right? One Rolls Royce, one Lamborghini, right? Whatever, one electric car maybe now, right? Whatever. You want to have one of those, right? So all that does when you have so much possessions, is that there's more worry. That's all it does. Why is that? Because you're worried about what happened to this one, what happened to that one. What happened to my properties in Florida? Are they okay? After the hurricane, did it survive? You know what I mean? The business that I have over there, is it okay? I have to go check, So what happens is that a person who has lots of possessions, what happens is that it doesn't really help him in life. In other words, being a tycoon is not really something that the Torah, encourages. We don't want to be tycoons. We're not interested in that. All we want to do is make a decent living, and live well, to be well off, whatever you want to say, right?
Again, there are historical figures in the Torah who were very wealthy.
Absolutely, but you shouldn't be running to do that. That's the whole thing, right? Don't make that your main goal in life.
Yeah. So those people.
Because the mazal will help you anyway. In other words, if your mazal is to be rich, you'll be rich anyway. No matter what. So don't try too hard. Like don't push the gamut. It's not going to help you much because the only thing it will help you is to have a lot of worries. That's why, right? These tycoons. What happens to them? This one has a stroke. This one has a heart attack. Why is that? Because they're always worried about everything. What's going to be over there? What's going to be over here? What's going to be with my Russian? That right? A lot of people got rich. These oligarchs, quote unquote, right? Some of them were people from our community. They became oligarchs. You know what I mean? So what happens is that when you become an oligarch, this. There's one Milashvili, who in Israel, Michal. He was an oligarch. This guy.
Okay.
So then he was in jail for a while, and then he left. He left Russia and moved to Israel.
Yeah.
He was an oligarch. So what happened was that he's had a tough life because certain things happen. But what happens is like this, when you're dealing with people like this, Putin and his friends, you know what I mean? You have oligarch status. You're always worried because you never know what this guy's going to do to you. He's going to poison you. He's going to send you some poisonous lunch. When you're sitting in your house in Spain, and murder your family. You know what I mean? That's the whole thing. When you have a lot of possessions, there's always people who are your enemies as well. Trying to get your possessions, trying to usurp your possessions. You know what I mean? You always have competition. You have all kinds of things like this going on. You know what I mean? So what happens is that the worries, like just they eat you up, they eat you alive. I don't know what's worse, the worms in the grave or the worries when you're alive. I'm not sure which one eats you up more.
Yeah.
That's why Shlomo Melech, right, he said, to the Kadosh Baruch Hu, in the book of Kohelet, in Ecclesiastes, you know what he says over there, right? He says, Kadosh Baruch Hu, because he was very wealthy, right, the wealthiest man ever. So he said to Kadosh Baruch Hu, he says, Hashem, don't make me wealthy, don't make me poor, just in the middle. Make me a middle class guy, I got my salary, I'm set, I have my front lawn, I have my backyard, I got a car to drive. Okay, I'm doing all right, I'm doing good. I take a vacation, maybe twice a year. I go somewhere. I'm doing well. I don't want to be a tycoon. I'm not interested in being an entrepreneur or whatever, all this stuff. Not interested. Why is that? Because what happens is that there's another problem, which is, this is what Shlomo Melech says, right? That when a person is a tycoon also, it causes him to rebel against HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He gets arrogant, He thinks like he did everything, like he accomplished everything. Kochi ve'otzi otzem yadi, asali et hachayil hazeh. That's what it says. Right, exactly. You think you did everything, I made the economy, I built this, I built that. The truth is you didn't build nothing. Hashem gave you everything. You know what I mean? But you think, the ego starts to get into the picture. You know what I mean? Believe me, man. You get into that, right? All of a sudden, you think you did it, Well, you didn't do nothing. This was Kadosh Baruch Hu gave you everything. You were in the right place at the right time. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but I don't know if I don't mean to interrupt again, if the Torah touches upon this.
Yeah.
Those people, there were studies done on those people. Those people are not like you and me. Most of them are sociopaths.
Well, yeah, I understand. They have also psychological issues.
Yes, yeah.
There's all kinds of things going on there. That's also true. But the truth is, that, I remember one time, I'll tell you something funny, right? That there was a wealthy guy that I knew in Israel. And something interesting, about him. He was the grandson of Baba Sali. Baba Sali was a big sage, like a big chacham, big Kabbalist. So he was his grandson. So the guy was like very wealthy, especially for Israel standards, wealthy man. Drives a Mercedes, and takes vacations, a nice opulent lifestyle, blah blah blah, the whole thing, right? So one day I remember, I was in his house. He invited us for Shabbat. We had some dinner with him, lunch. Well, not dinner, lunch. So we went there, and he had some light fixtures, like fancy stuff, in his house, So one of them breaks, goes out, So he cited this Pirkeh Avot, Marben Nechazim Marben Lega. Says, now I'm worried about this light, I have to fix it, We have all this fancy lighting going on. So what happens is the more fancy stuff you have, you know what it is, right? Having 5 cars, you got to take care of each one. Each one is your baby.
Yeah.
You got to go to the mechanic. You got this worry. What's going to be with the engine over there? The air shocks. This. You got all these worries in your head.
Yeah, it was freaking me out.
You know what I mean? That's the whole thing. So what does a person do to alleviate this problem? Very simple. You should only buy things that you need. Don't buy things that you don't need them. Just to have fun, to enjoy. Like the collector. I'm a collector. What collector? What are you collecting? Just live your life. Buy whatever you need, and then use it. How many do you need? How many of these things do you need? How many refrigerators do you need in the house? There are some people. They have 3 refrigerators. What do you need 3 refrigerators for? What is that for?
Well,
You know what I mean?
You're talking about Nancy Pelosi?
I wasn't thinking about her, but
She needs a separate freezer.
right for the ice cream,
for
of
the
course.
ice
Yeah,
cream.
right. I got you. But right. Somebody was talking to me about that. Oh yeah, I wanted to tell you, right, that I have a cousin, who's wealthy, like a wealthy lawyer. I'm not sure if you know her. She's a girl. So one time she invited me to her house. She had a birthday party. This was 10 years ago or more. I happened to be here visiting, So she invited me. She lives in Great Neck, a fancy neighborhood. And she's got a nice fancy house, So I go in there, and the house is beautiful, really lovely, I wouldn't have even been surprised about the house. I mean, a nice, wealthy house, good-looking, opulent house. But what really, made me nuts was like, she has like a TV screen in every room, in the house. Like, she's got like 20 rooms in there. Every room has a TV screen, it's like, and they're all on, like, so every room you go to, you're watching some kind of a video, like some, like these excesses, like, what do you need these things for, It's too much. Like, you don't need that much. You don't need to have all these things in your life. I mean, that's the whole thing. So I was like thinking to myself, like, what does she do? What she walks into every room and watches TV? What does she need this for? So why she's putting it on to show off to us, to show us like, she's like a fancy girl, she's got a TV in every room. Wow, you're so amazing. Wow, let me like bow down to you, and kiss your feet. What is that? You understand what I'm saying? It's like very childish kind of, but why am I telling you this? That it's silly, like, you don't need a TV screen in every room. You don't need that. You don't need to have, all these possessions. Marbeh nechasim, marbeh deaga. Just buy whatever you need. You have a function for it, something. You're going to do something with that. Don't just buy things. I remember when we were kids, You remember our friend, one of our friends, I'm not going to mention his name. Maybe he's watching the video. But sometimes he watches. One of our old friends, right? So what happened was that he was like one of my good friends. You remember him. And so one time I go to his, I met him somewhere here in Queens, and I see like a guitar case, he's got a guitar, so he opens it up, and he shows me, so in those days, like the Charvel guitars were like really
I think
style.
he insured it at one point.
Yeah, right. You remember that?
Yeah.
Charvel, Charvel Strat with the tremolo, and locking tremolo and all this, all stuff. That was like the in guitar at that time. You know what I mean? The cool guitar. So, it was beautiful color, like very beautiful, gorgeous, So I was like, I told him, I said, but you don't play guitar. What do you need this for?
A novelty.
You know what I mean?
It is a novelty. Yeah, I remember he
I
couldn't
told him, I
play,
said, if you don't play, like, you can't even do one chord. You can't strum one chord.
Yeah.
What do you need a guitar for? I said, I just actually enjoy having it. What? Like, what are you talking about?
Well, maybe as a kid, it's excusable.
That's the thing, These people are kids, from their whole life they're kids.
Yeah.
I mean, they behave like children, That's what it is. That's the whole thing, So that's what we're trying to avoid.
It's like those crooks, in 2008, 2009.
Yeah.
When they took people's life savings on Wall Street.
Oh.
And a couple of them bought a $50,000 coat hanger.
Right. BLM, right? So, yeah, those people, right? They ripped off everybody. Yeah, so let's go on, right? So, let's go on.
Excess.
Yeah, excesses, yeah. With other people's money,
Yeah.
Of course, yeah. Not your own money, God forbid. Right? So again, right, it goes on to say, Marbeh nashim, marbeh keshafim. Oh, so it says, if you have a lot of women, you like chicks, you like to hang around with chicks, all you're going to do is marbeh keshafim. What does that mean? A lot of sorcery. So what's the story over here? What does that mean, right? So it's talking about a man who takes like several wives, He wants to have like 3 or 4 or 5 or, just for insurance sake, or whatever, like something as a backup, So he takes a few women, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever it is, right? So the only thing, this is not going to be a good thing in your life. That's what I'm trying to tell you, right? The only thing is being a lot of keshafim. What does that mean? Sorcery. So what's the sorcery have to do with this, So the truth is, the women are known to like, have an affinity to sorcery. Most sorcerers are women. You know what I mean? You know that, right? It's a fact. So that's why it says in the Torah, by the way, when it talks about sorcerers, the sin of sorcery, it uses a female language. Because we assume that she's a woman. I mean, most sorcerers are women. Except your friend over there, right? Except that guy. So what does that mean? That they're going to use sorcery because you have several women. So each one wants to have you fall in love with them, They try to do sorcery, to get you to fall in love with them. That's the whole thing, So the only thing you do by having a lot of women is creating this scenario.
So even
You know what I
though
mean?
you were allowed, the Torah didn't really condone
Yeah, it's not
it.
really recommended.
It's
Yeah,
not
it's not really
recommended,
recommended so
yeah.
much. Yeah, unless there's a real need for it. You know what I mean? What could be a real need, by the way, to have several wives? Let's say a person lives in two different places, right? Two different countries. You know, he travels back and forth. So he can't take his wife with him. She can't go with him, whatever. She wants to stay at home. She's got children. So he has a wife over there. He has a wife over here. Sometimes that can be, tolerated. Something like that, right? Today we don't do, obviously. Today we don't do these kinds of things. We don't do multiple wives today. Unless it's a very, some kind of very extreme situation. The Bet Din sometimes allows that. But in general, right, we're not allowed to do that today in our times. But even though, right, it was allowed, not recommended as a general rule. That's the thing, right? Okay, very good. So that's regarding women. So what does that mean? The best thing to do, is to have one partner, a good wife that you love, and live life with her. Why do you have to be so greedy? Looking for this woman, that woman. How many do you need? What do you think? What do you think? What do you think? A woman is a collector's item? Collects women. What kind of thing is that? It's like excess. When a person gets excesses. This is one of them. So it's harmful. So why is it harmful, by the way? Because keshafim, sorcery, it can cause you to die. Sometimes people die from sorcery. You know what I mean? So it's a danger, playing with fire. You know what I mean? That's the whole thing. It's not a joke. Okay, very good. Right? It goes on to say, Marbe shepachot marbe zima, right? If you have lots of servants, maidservants, there's going to be a lot of impropriety there. You know what I mean? You know what I'm talking about? Illicit relations. Why? Because these maidservants are usually available, for all kinds of games. You know what I mean? If you know what I'm talking about, right? So that's what happens, right? That when you have too many maidservants in the house, and each one, is available, for all kinds of games, it's going to turn your house into a, excuse my language, right? Bardak, Excuse my language, right? It's going to become a circus over there. So that's why it's not recommended to have many of them, So what does that mean? If a person needs like a butler or a maid, like one, or two, you don't have to have many, like one butler, one maid. If you're a rich guy, right? And, you want to have somebody serving you, okay, so, have one and one or something like that, right? But don't go overboard, with this kind of thing. Okay, so then he goes on to say, Marbe Abadim, Marbe Gazel, another incredible thing, which doesn't apply so much today, by the way, but definitely the concept still applies somewhat. If you have lots of slaves, right? In those days they had slavery, right? So you could buy a slave. Today we don't have slavery, Baruch Hashem. We don't have that. But what happens is that when you have a lot of slaves in the house, there's going to be a lot of also theft in the house. Why? Because they usually steal, these people, They're usually very handy, if you know what I mean. They're very handy. They know how to play with their hands, and grab things, right? So they're usually suspected of, stealing. So what's going to be is if you're going to have many servants like that, slaves in the house, there's going to be like every day you're going to hear, oh, this was stolen, that was stolen, What happened? Who stole it?
When was that abolished by the Torah?
What, slavery?
Yeah.
It was never abolished by the Torah. It was abolished by humanity. No, it's not acceptable today.
But the Torah allowed
The Torah never abolished it.
It allowed it.
Yeah, it was at one time it was very commonplace, So very,
And it never condemned it.
No, there's no condemnation because in Torah slavery has a purpose. I mean, I don't want to get into it now. It's a whole discussion by itself. What the purpose of slavery is, right? There's a purpose. You know what it is? Slavery in Torah is like a form of rehabilitation. You know what I mean? In other words, a person becomes a slave in order to get rehabilitated from his criminal, behavior, from his, it's a rehabilitation kind of thing. It's a whole thing. It's a whole discussion. What that has to entails. Don't want to get into it now. Okay, it goes on to say, right? So look what it says, right? Marbe Torah, marbe Chaim. So if you have a lot of Torah, you have lots of life, right? So what does that mean? As the Zohar Kadosh says, right? The tree of life is the Torah. So if you have a lot of Torah, you're learning Torah all the time, right? You don't want to go out, to the restaurants, hang around, because you're learning all the time. You don't have time for that, right? To hang around the street, go here, go there. you're always in the study, Torah study, you have lots of life, because why? It says in the Zohar Kadosh, whoever is attached to the Torah, he's attached to life. Whenever you detach from Torah, what does that mean? You stop learning. You're plugging yourself out of life. So what does that mean? Make sure you're plugged in. As much as you can. Don't waste your time. Don't waste your life with vain pursuits. You know what I mean? Hanging around here, hanging around over there, this park, that street, the restaurant, the movie theater, who needs all these things? You want to have life? There's no life over there, these places. It's all death there in these places. The only place where you have life is the Torah. So what does that mean? You want to have life? Plug it in. Plug into the Torah right away. That's the whole thing, right? I'll tell you something, interesting. That I have a friend, who's a convert. And she lives in Israel, this lady. Okay? So, why do I tell you about her? She's like elderly lady, like 72, whatever. She's very young in her soul, but she's whatever. So I'll tell you something interesting. That she watches my videos all the time, and she's always learning Torah. So she's very happy. She's always telling me, how happy she is, because she's plugged into the Torah. So what does that mean? Whoever you may be, or whatever you may be, you're a Jew. You're plugged into Torah. You're plugged into life. Makes you happy. Makes you joyful. No matter what happens in your life, let's say your life is not doing so well. Sometimes, there are downs in life, ups and downs, what I mean? There are times in your life where there's a crisis going on, all kinds of things going on. We've all been through it, we know what it's like. So, but if you're plugged into the Torah, you're plugged into life. Nothing will knock you out. Whatever it is, you'll get through it. You know what I mean? Because you're plugged into life. But a person who plugs out of life, he leaves the Torah and goes to seek all kinds of vain things, worthless things. Where is he going to get his life from? There's no life without Torah. The only life there is in this world is Torah. Everything else is close to death, more or less. You know what I mean? That's pretty much what it is. Unless it's coming to support the Torah. It's coming to support the Torah, coming to help the Torah. So what does that mean? If you're doing some kind of mundane activity, in order that you should be able to learn Torah, that's good. But if you're doing it just for fun, for entertainment, for pleasure, no good, You should be learning Torah at that time. That's the thing. So, that's the thing, right? Now we're getting to the positive side, right? The positive side is, you have Torah, you have life, everything is good, by the way, we'll finish with this, right? I'll tell you, that Chazal say, when it comes to, certain character traits, that people have, right? It's good not to be in extreme, the Rambam says, right? Not good to be in extremes, character traits. Except when it comes to Torah, right? So what does that mean? When it comes to Torah, you can be extreme. Learn too much Torah. It'll never hurt you. It'll never harm you. You know what I mean? No matter how much you exaggerate, no matter how much you go nuts for the Torah, it'll never hurt you. It'll never harm you. Nothing bad will come out of it. Only good. So what does that mean? When it comes to Torah, you can be very extreme, right? But don't be extreme on the other side, right? If you're going to be extreme on the other side, wasting your life away, no good. But if you're extreme on this side, to be always learning Torah, there are some people like, I have some friends that they're so in love with Torah, even when they're eating, like they're learning, they're looking into a book, eating their cereal like this, and looking in the book, like they can't take their eyes away from the book. And that's a good thing, by the way, the person who has this kind of character. Also, right? What does it say? When you're traveling on the road, also you should be learning Torah. So what does that mean? If you can't read because you're walking or whatever, at least, have some earphones, some headphones, listen to Torah, listen to lectures, whatever. Right? All kinds of things. Make sure you're always plugged into the Torah. You're plugged in Torah, you're plugged into life. No Torah, you're plugged out of life. God forbid. Baruch Adonai le'olam, amen, amen. Thanks for coming. Be blessed with wealth, health, and happiness.
It's interesting that all these stories